as we move forward to next week, and the we had 7 thumbs up to reconsider the vote on the Plains property purchase or sale, and since then a difficulty was identified in our ordinances, or excuse me, in our resolutions, whereby a previous council passed a resolution saying that a motion and a past item can only be reconsidered at the next session, and that it can only be voted on if all the members of council were present, which is not feasible in all cases. And since we had one member abstain, that was an oversight that was not foreseen by the council that passed that resolution. That is, why would you have to have a member who abstained be present for the revote? And so before we can have the revote, we will need to consider whether to alter that resolution to allow council to vote with a member absent who abstained at the original vote, if I said that in a way that made sense. And so that would have to happen next week prior to taking a revote on the sale. So just want to make sure people are aware of that, because that will then be part of the agenda to consider an amendment to that resolution that would again allow the council to move forward with a member absent only if that member had abstained. Did I say that correctly, Wallace?
Excellent.
Okay. So, and then we would do that again before the vote.
And Mr. Mayor, I would just ask the city attorney's office to clarify and state very clearly that your position is that that type of a resolution or memorandum or whatever of the city council can indeed be amended at the meeting, and then at that same meeting we can proceed on the substance of this kind of a question. Just so that there's no question that that's your legal opinion that we can do that.
Mayor and members of council, if it was an ordinance, it would be different because the ordinances take effect 21 days after passage. But because it's a resolution that takes effect immediately, essentially upon the vote, we're just waiting for the mayor's signature. It shouldn't be any problem that I can see.
Okay, everybody okay with that? All right, let's move on then to trees and shrubs.
Oh, goody.
I think the primary reason we're discussing this is Councilman Cathy had some serious concerns and you were absent. And so we didn't want to move forward with the final reading until we had another chance to make sure that your objections were noted and maybe persuade us to change the language. So
I appreciate that, and thank you all. The two things that I'm concerned about is, can neighbors, because it says in here that it's supposed to be family members, can neighbors come over and do it, or can friends come over and do it if it's not done for pay? And what I'm looking at and trying to figure out is, like when we had Snowmageddon and then all of the trees down and everything else, people were going around helping neighbors, picking up limbs, climbing the neighbor's tree to get a broken limb down before it fell on something, doing all of those types of things. And a large portion of that was basically friends and neighbors helping people, as opposed to actual always relatives. And is that still permissible under this particular ordinance? Because that was a big deal back then. And believe it or not, it's probably gonna happen again.
now my reading of it was that we defined commercial arborist as someone who does the work for pay. Doesn't that take care of that objection?
Mr. Mayor, at the risk of trying to button in on Councilman Cathy, this proposed amended ordinance with my proposed amendments being noted in red here, I think goes some ways towards answering the two questions that you've had. And it hopefully goes a long ways towards answering the concern that I had. Because what I wanted to try to achieve with this is to make it really, really clear to anybody that opens up this ordinance and reads it that this applies to and primarily focuses on commercial arborists. And that's why, with the help of the city attorney's office and the nice Deborah, the nice secretary there, we came up with this language that to promote public safety and the care of trees and shrubs, the primary focus of this chapter is to govern licensing and conduct of commercial arborists. This chapter only governs private property owners and their family members and businesses and their employees who may occasionally be involved in tree and shrub removal, trimming, maintenance on property owned or controlled by said business, when specific reference is made in the chapter. So that, for instance, when there are, like the idea of planting trees within 2 feet of the sidewalk or something like that, that's nobody's supposed to do that. But so that was the focus of what I went through here with these amendments to try to really make it clear that this applies to commercial arborists. Under aerial operations, I inserted in there, proposed to insert in there, that aerial operations means trimming anything 12 feet above the ground or not, but only when that is by a commercial arborist. So if homeowner wants to go up there and climb around, or business owner wants to say, well, Fred, you're my employee, climb up there and do that, that's not covered by this. Also, under the definition of commercial arborist, I proposed to insert in there that means any person who is not a property owner or family member of a property owner or an employee of a business owning or controlling property. And then also we thought to insert in there, however, an employee or subcontractor of a duly franchised public utility, which would be like Rocky Mountain Power or the cable TV or the phone company or that, because they routinely do maintenance on their lines, which I think they have the right to do. Those employees who are retained and engaged in overhead line work and have agreed to comply with ANSI Z 133 standards are not included in the definition of commercial arborists. And there again, my idea is to focus that this is on commercial arborists who are out hiring themselves out to do this, not property owners and businesses maintaining their own property.
But this gets back to exactly what I'm asking about, because you specifically state in there the property owner or their relative.
That's true. And
So if I'm the next door neighbor and I go over there and go 13 feet up into that neighbor's tree,
well, no,
I'm in violation
no,
of that.
no, because even that aerial operation under my proposal is aerial operation by a commercial arborist. So while this does not have language that says neighbors can volunteer to do things, the focus, what I'm trying to focus everybody on with this is that this legislation is intended to deal with commercial arborists, and it only deals with private property owners and that kind of thing when there's a specific reference in the ordinance that it governs them. That's what my feeling is, and I really kind of think that that's I don't know how, really, and I thought about this, and I really don't know how you'd say that, well, okay, we can have volunteers going around volunteering to do this kind of stuff without regulation, because I can just picture it that, to be really blunt and politically incorrect, meth heads and undesirable, oh, well, I was just volunteering to do this. And then this, this really truly becomes meaningless legislation. And so I couldn't picture a way to draft a volunteer exception into this But I think though that by focusing this legislation on commercial arborists, because that's what we want to talk about is the commercial arborists. By focusing it on that, I don't think it precludes the neighbor from volunteering to help. But that's just my feeling, and I can't figure out a way to go any farther in saying that. If somebody can wordsmith that better than I can think of a way. But anyway, though, that's what, this is what my proposal for the aspects of this that I would like to have clarified. And the reason that I wanted to see this table was to try to clarify those things. And this, unless I really goofed up the language on this.
Other reactions to Mike's proposal?
Then leave out the part about he can trim his own trees as long as it's him or his relatives, and just state in there that when he hires a commercial arborist, then these things apply.
Ken?
I don't know if I'm reading this wrong. The first page, A, to promote public safety and care of trees and shrubs, the primary focus of this chapter is to govern the license and conduct of commercial arborists. The primary focus, and you kept saying this is about commercial arborists. This chapter only governs private property owners and their family members and blah, blah, blah. It's chapter would I guess this chapter only governs private property owners. I don't understand.
Well, what my intent there was to say that it only governs private property owners, blah, 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 when they are occasionally involved in tree and shrub removal. Maybe there's a better way to wordsmith that, because it's not to imply that it governs them, but that it only covers private property and businesses doing their own tree stuff when there's a specific reference in here that says that it does.
Okay,
And I see what you're talking about.
because
the
that's
potential-
saying I'm a private property owner, and this is governing me now.
It says, sorry.
Am I looking at it
It says
wrong?
this chapter only governs private property owners when specific reference is made in this chapter.
Oh, okay.
It is a little awkward to have
Yeah.
that at the very end of the sentence.
Yeah, if somebody can wordsmith that better than I could, because I kept hitting it.
Why not just say the chapter only governs private property owners when specific reference is made in this chapter?
Much better wordsmithing.
Just leave all that stuff in the middle out. Does it still work?
Would for me.
I think that'll work, yeah.
Yes.
And I think it's even a bigger issue than we're talking about here. If you have your neighbors come over and help you build a fence and you run over them with a tractor, you're still gonna get sued, and you'll lose. When you hire some kid to shovel your sidewalks, if that kid gets hurt, or a kid to mow your lawn, if that gets hurt, you're still gonna be wounded.
Could you recite that eloquent language?
All I did was take out the middle. I just said this chapter only governs private property owners and their family members and businesses and their employees when specific reference is made in this chapter. I just took out the who to
Yeah,
business.
And I think that language that you took out is probably covered elsewhere in the
I
ordinance
think that works.
anyway.
Yeah, I think that works.
So, yeah, I'd be cool with
Is that
that. And
work for you? Other comments on Mike's suggestion? How do you feel about it, Steve?
Still leaves a lot of gray area, and then the other thing is I still feel that a licensed demolition contractor in an unoccupied area does not need to have an arborist there when they're ripping down trees.
Right, but we did discuss that, and I think you lost that one, if I remember correctly.
Mr.
Okay.
Mayor,
You, I owe it
That's okay to
to
bring it
the
up again.
people to still bring it up.
Fair
That
enough.
was what I said the other night,
Yep.
is that this is going to pass. I still owe it to the constituents that have expressed interest to try to do their bidding,
Fair enough.
okay?
well,
I think the sense was it was dangerous enough for whoever, that
And-
we should
and-
have
and
people
Mr.
with training, so.
Mr. Mayor,
I think Kristen was waiting though, too.
okay.
Oh, I was just gonna reiterate the point of when we had first discussed that, just because the site is unoccupied doesn't mean the surrounding sites are unoccupied.
Okay.
You don't know how a tree's gonna fall,
Yeah,
just
that
because you have
was
an
one-
excavator.
That was one of the concerns. But Mike, we're getting reactions to your
Yeah,
proposal, so.
well, but I kinda wanted to answer Councilman Kathy a little bit.
But we just,
there.
we already,
Yeah, okay.
we already disposed
Sure,
of that.
okay. You're disposed
So-
of.
That's fine. So, all right, any other
I
reactions to
appreciate you
Mike's
even waiting.
proposal? Are people, are people okay with this language, to change this?
Yeah.
Okay, thumbs up?
Mr. Mayor?
I'm
before you-
sorry?
Before you vote, could I make a couple of suggestions that you guys can consider? First, drafting ordinances, I haven't been involved in this whole process at all until today. And it's really hard to draft an ordinance that everybody's familiar with, that when you read for the first time, you understand it completely. And I'm a little concerned about the definitional language in C, 1232.020C, that I just saw, and I'll explain where I'm going, and then you can tell me what you're trying to accomplish, and perhaps I can get.
Which
get some
subsection?
Definition of commercial arborist?
Yes, commercial arborist definition, there's language added that says, who is not a property owner or family member of a property owner. So commercial arborist means that. To me, just reading it out of the blue, without any discussion, that tells me that if I'm a renter, or my family member is a renter, I'm by definition a commercial arborist. And I obviously that's not what we're trying to accomplish here, but I need to understand what we are trying to accomplish to give you some suggestions. I would suggest that perhaps if we're just trying to get a group who are excluded from regulation under this ordinance, we can put that in an entirely different section. The following businesses or people, family members, like was discussed earlier, are excluded from this ordinance, this application, instead of trying to modify this definition that carries all the way through the rest of the ordinance.
Isn't your intent, Mike, isn't your intent to say that a commercial arborist is a person who is working on a property that he or she does not own?
Mm-hmm.
For pay, for remuneration.
So why not say that? Go ahead.
Well,
Well,
I think if you,
I'm
you-
wondering,
if you look at,
What line are you
Let's
on?
on line 58 on page 2.
I think, if you just look, if you take the red section out, it says commercial arborist means any person, firm or corporation engaged in the business of cutting, pruning, whatever for compensation. I think that's enough. I don't think we even need that.
If that's clear to if we take my proposed additional language out of there, if it's still clear to everybody in the room that, you know, what we're talking about is what Councilman, I'd be happy to take that out, I've been accused of using extra words all the time.
Really?
To me,
Come on.
a commercial anything is someone who's doing it for compensation. Period.
So I'd be happy to take that red.
I thought that made sense before.
Okay.
Wallace, does that solve it for you if we just take the
So we're taking
proposal
the red
language,
language.
It really would.
proposed language out of there? Okay. Did that read clearly, everybody else? Just leave it the way it was? Okay. And then how people feel about the change to duly franchised public
I
utility?
think that's good.
Should be-
Are you cool with that yellow language, Wallace?
Mayor,
Yes.
members of council, I am, that
Okay.
makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay.
Okay, everybody okay with that change to make that more generic? Okay.
Actually, that satisfies what I was concerned about as much as anything as well.
Oh, okay. Well, see? All right, are we done with trees and shrubs?
I think that the only other proposed change that I would point out to anybody there is line 117 on page 3, where it talks about trees shall not be planted by any party, added in there by any party, to make it clear that that applies to everybody, whether you're a commercial arborist, a private property owner, whatever, closer than 2 feet to any curb sidewalk or
Okay.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Everybody okay with that? Make it crystal clear, no trees are going 2 feet closer. All right, are we ready to put this to third reading on the 5th then with those changes? Thumbs up? Okay, good, on we go. Let's go on to police station assessment.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, tonight is your first sort of oral presentation with regard to the elements of the assessment dealing with a proposed facility to replace our Hall of Justice location. In this, we're going to talk about pricing, we're going to talk about programming, justification with respect to a build-out scenario, and frankly, we're going to see a real similar presentation with regard to the fire station, replacement of Station 1 following. So with that sort of broad introduction, if I could go ahead and defer the floor to our consultant, I'd appreciate it.
Please do.
Thank you.
This is a PowerPoint presentation. I think this is, that's the whole slide. This will be a little bit briefer.
Welcome to sunny Casper.
Thank you very much.
Great timing on your part.
It's an adventure out here, right?
That's one way to say it.
Love the snow, love getting out here. Mr. Neighbor, should I go ahead and distribute these, or?
Whatever you'd like, you betcha.
These are the printed report documents, but we will also make available all of these documents on a thumb drive for anybody that prefers that way.
Thank you. Mr. Estes, why don't you introduce yourself, if you don't mind?
Okay, I'm James Estes, and I'm the president of Wilson Estes Police Architects. And first of all, let me say we appreciate the opportunity that we have to work for your community and the department. I think it's been a good relationship. It's our privilege to be able to do this. This is all we do. This is why we are here today, is because it is a police facility design. And we've been doing this for 30-some years. We've been doing this for approximately 32 years. So we hope that we have something to bring to the table. And we'll get into a little bit of that in the discussion as we talk about the actual planning process. Two more?
Might need one for this gentleman when he's here next time. Thank you.
Well, and what I'm going to do is I want to get into the things that are important to you and that matter to you. So I put together a brief presentation so that we can talk about the things that are most important to you. I'm going to cover some of the topics that I think are going to be to highlight some of the key things that we've done along the way. And the first thing I want to talk about is the study process and essentially how that process went. The first thing we do when we do a project like this is we develop a program. We don't start looking at, is the Hall of Justice the right building to be renovated for the police facility, or should we build a new facility, or should we renovate an empty building somewhere? The first thing we want to do is, in conjunction with the police department, is develop a statement of need. What are the spaces that are square footages that become rooms in a project? And it's all based on the functions of the department. So the first thing we do is we kind of turn a blind eye to how we're going to meet this need, and we simply determine that need. The next thing we did in this process, and this is really based on the scope of work put out in the RFQ, is we looked at the facilities deficiencies within the city, within the Hall of Justice, the City Center, Market Street Garage, And more or less, the nerd building, the communication center, but we're not really factoring that in other than it is rented space and it is a space that is occupied by a component of the department today. But we looked at primarily the buildings in the downtown area, the Hall of Justice, City Center, Market Street Garage. The next thing we did is, after developing a program and looking at this level of deficiency of the current facilities, is we identify the development scenarios. And essentially, that's discovering what is the best way to meet the needs of this program that we have developed. And then the other thing we do is we develop costs for all of the scenarios that we've identified, and then we compare and contrast the weaknesses and strengths of each of the development scenarios, how they cost out, is there money to be saved, and if there is money to be saved in a certain development scenario, at what expense to the functionality of the building as a police and courts facility. So that's the process that we have been going through. I want to talk a little bit more about that process, because I think you need to understand, when you get to a building that is expensive like these are, how did we get to that number? We aren't just picking these numbers out of the air. And here's kind of how the process goes. First of all, it's very interactive with the staff, with the police department. The users of the facility are really a key component. You can't design a highly functional building unless you have interactions with them. We had a high level of interaction with the heads of the department, the management, and a cross-section of people that came through within each division to determine exactly what kind of spaces that we would be needing. And really, we're not determining so much space as we are determining function. That is to say, what they do, how they do it, not even what kind of space is necessary. We go back to our own databases to determine how much space is necessary for a given function that they have. But given that, to tailor fit a building to the department here in Casper, we have to understand how they do things, how they move evidence through the building, how they detain and interview suspects, witnesses, potential people that they encounter throughout their routine operations. So in that interaction, what we, I believe, bring to the table is an experienced guidance. We always tell the personnel that we're working for that we're not going to cram anything down your throat. We're not going to tell you, here is the way you develop a police facility. We're going to give them the benefit of knowing what departments all around the country do when we hear similar types of functions and operations that they perform. So we're guiding them, and that guidance, I think, is intended to make sure that it's not just a wish list of things the department wants. It's based on the specific needs they have, but we're always kind of balancing against what is the norm? What is the normal way to do that? And there are times where a department, because they're living within the constraints of an inefficient, deficient building, there's certain aspects that they may not even think about. So we're bringing to them the benefit of working on and designing highly efficient, highly functional buildings that think of all the things necessary to allow a police department to do the things they do well. The other thing we do is we plan based on national standards. We don't just make up numbers ourselves. We have a database, and it's based on a study that was started under a federal grant in 1974 to 1978. We logged departments all over the country, how big they were, for the size of the staff. We continue to do that today, and so that when we actually determined all the functions within a department like Casper's, when we start assigning space to that, we assign space based on what kind of space is required based on a national standard. In doing that, I think it brings credibility to the process, because we have a reason for how much space we allowed for any function that's going on. And space, square footage, is the primary thing that drives the cost of a building. There's other things within it, but the easiest way to control cost is to add or deduct space. So when we employ standards, I think we're trying to make sure that we have an under-designed and we're going to come to a building that is obsolete before its time because they run out of space, and yet it's not over-designed, it's not the Taj Mahal. It can be justified how much space we're putting into a project like this. The other thing we did in this exercise is we looked at planned growth. If you build a police facility for today's need, when you open that facility in 2 years, you're already going to be getting behind. These are expensive buildings to construct, in part because they're a solid building. If you think about the level of separation that has to occur between public and staff, you have to think about how you secure evidence. There's impact, bullet-resistant glass in there, the security and access control systems within the building. They're a 24/7 critical use building, and that drives a more complicated, more expensive structural system in the building. On top of that, there's a lot of other code things that are required of a 24/7 critical use building. So these buildings are expensive, and it becomes doubly expensive when you outgrow them too soon because you didn't plan for down the road for any kind of growth, and a few years into the project, you're tearing out walls. Because here's one of the things about a police building. It's not like a school where you can add on a new wing. Growth occurs throughout the building. There's a few detectives added, a few patrolmen, somebody in records, somebody in evidence, somebody in administration. And to account for that kind of growth, you either have to account for it in the actual design so that they grow into it and into a fit, or you have to tear out walls early in the process, and there's kind of a ripple effect when you do that. You tear out one wall to put people into a new space, and it kind of ripples through the building. Everything kind of starts changing. So planned growth is very important in this process. And the other thing that we did in working with the department is we made sure that it's tailored to Casper's police department and to your community. We are never trying to sell them something that they don't need. And again, I think with the command level staff, chief's involvement, everybody's involvement, I think we've got a planned program that is very good, very credible, very legitimate. That said, it's expensive, and you will see that, and that's why it's important for it to be, the actual planning to be very credible. I'm gonna jump into just very briefly, and there's backup support for all of this. This is just kind of the summary of the space needed by the program. This is not a design building. This is what the need is. And what we do is we look at the staff. There's about 151 personnel today. Our planning for 20 to 25 years would grow the department to about 205 personnel, along with your population growth. Again, these numbers we work through with the staff and some other city planners that give us information about the growth of the community. But as we start looking at that, we look at the staff in each of the different divisions of the department, and these are the square footages. These are net square footage, the space inside the building for each of the divisions. Now, in this report document, these are the accumulation of each of these divisions. There's a breakdown of every room that goes into that space in your document, so a person can always go back and scratch out. You know, if we have fluff in there, it can easily be identified and taken out. What we find, and I think what you and this department would find, is if you went back into this document and said we need to cut square footage out of this core police function, you'd probably be hard pressed to do it because there's not much in there that isn't really mandatory for quality police operation. So the net square footage that they need today, and the reason we do this in 2 stages, this is what they would need if they just were building a building for today. Not duplicating what they have, but if they were frozen in time and never going to change, this department of 151 would require about 52,000 square feet of police space. We have another 8,400 square feet of court space, and then we have garage and training areas of about 13,000 square feet. So this is what they should be in if they were in proper facilities today, about 74,000 square feet. This is what the growth would look like. It's about 85,000 square feet. Now, one of the good things about planning for growth in a building, you can see here that we're only growing the building by 10, 11, 12%, while the department is growing by about 33%. the building doesn't get proportionally larger as the department gets larger. What that means is if your department grows by 30%, the building doesn't necessarily grow by 30%. So there's an economy of scale as the building and the department get larger. But these are a couple of kind of key numbers. 74,000 is what they should be in today. 85,000 square feet is what they would be in the future. Now, those are big numbers, and when you start putting the square footage cost to them, it gets to be a number that you have to, the community has to buy into. They have to understand why this is necessary. But one of the things that we do is we chart these departments that are building new facilities back through time and currently. And what this graph actually indicates is it's the average size of building for a department of a given size. And what you see is that as a department gets smaller, the amount of square footage per person goes up. Now, this line, this red line that runs through there, is the average size building for any given size department. And so here we are at Casper with a planned department of about 205 personnel. And the only thing that's really important here is how you are close to that line. You're just slightly over, but that's because not everybody's going to be right on that average. The average is between. It's kind of made up of highs and a high and a low. What we get a little bit concerned of is when you get, and these are actual departments, the built facilities, but some of them are outliers. They're incredibly large buildings for the size department. But when you're within about 15% of the average, you're kind of in a tight range that our belief is it's justifiable for a police department. And so when I see that our planning, the square foot per person in this building is very close to what the average is all around the country, it says to me that we did not over-design, we did not over-program and make the building too large. So after we developed the program, the next thing we did is we started looking at the existing facility deficiencies. Quite frankly, you could start looking at the facility deficiencies ahead of time and say, why plan a program for a new building or a new renovation if you haven't established that there is a deficiency in your facility? I think it's probably pretty well known in this council and certainly in the department that there are deficiencies within your facility. And we're going to take kind of a brief look at that. Again, we go into much more detail in the study document. The first thing we did when we looked at the level of deficiency in the building was we wanted to know how is the space used. I mean, if you start looking at it, you have about 46,000 square feet of space. And you might say, you could ask yourself one of two questions. We're saying that they need 74,000 square feet today. Why do they need that much? Well, we think they're short on the space that they really should have, even if you take into account all of their facilities. But what we do is we start looking at where the space is. And what this is, again, it's explained a little bit more in the document, but these are the different divisions of space. You have administration, you have investigations, you have evidence here in the green, you have some public services, patrol is in the orange. It kind of gives us an idea of how much space is not only in the overall building size, but how much net space is in the building, because a building that isn't designed really doesn't have a high level of space efficiency can sometimes have a lot of wasted space in the building. And so in our report, we don't just document how undersized the overall building is, we also describe how undersized each of the spaces is for each of the groups. There's a lot of issues within this building. The greatest issue is truly just a lack of space. That's the easiest one for anybody to see, but there's clearly many, many more. And again, we've highlighted several of them in the book, but there's security and access concerns. We don't go into great detail on those, but they're there and they should be remedied. There's a lot of code issues related to ADA and access, insufficient toilets. I mean, how you bring the public into the building. There's a lot of downsides related to how the department can function with the people in the building. And then there's just the normal wear and tear on the building. It's an older building, it doesn't have the technological infrastructure that you would hope to have in a modern police facility. So there's many issues, but the easiest one to see is just a simple lack of space. And so we looked at that for each of the floors in the Hall of Justice. The Hall of Justice has, I think, about 26,000 square feet. And even that number is kind of inflated because some of it is this garage space, which isn't very efficient in terms of the police department being able to use it. Patrol functions are kind of down in the basement where, you know, it's not the optimum for bringing in people on patrol, on and off duty. It's just a lot of issues related to the placement on the different floor levels, how much space is available. And this is a third floor space. This is a fitness room. And this just kind of highlights how they're just kind of working to get any space they can in the building. They're so tight on space that, you know, they gain a little space on the third floor and they put in a fitness facility. Probably, and it works pretty well, but I would tell you that even as a modern fitness facility, you know, you want to get everybody involved in the department in terms of not just weightlifting, but cardio. And like a lot of these, this is probably a great place for the Intuit workout buffs, but maybe some of the cardio for everybody department wide. You could kind of lighten the space up a little bit, little more natural light in some things. But it does kind of highlight how they're just finding whatever space they can within the building to make it work for them. This is the city center building. One of the things you notice here, there's an awful lot of space that is not really functional use space by the departments in there. And again, this is primarily personnel training, career services. And one of the things I would tell you at this time is that these buildings being separate, most of the time, when you take departments built all around the country, until you get to about 150, 200,000 population, every department that is building new facilities are pulling everybody back into under a single roof. And it's simply because it's easier to manage a department. It's more efficient to do it that way. Certainly there's a point where you break out into precincts. I don't think you should be there. You would give much more functionality by bringing everybody under one roof. So even the fact that you have 46,000 square feet of space is kind of misleading because it's in multiple buildings and some of that space is really not very good at all. And all of it would be much improved if the whole department was under one roof working together. It just makes management so much easier. This is one of those spaces that is given credit for upping the square footage of the department, but it's the Market Street garage, and really some of the space in the Market Street garage, it's overflow space. I mean, they're using it for things they need, but you really can't define it as saying that's quality police space. It's just a building that houses things that no longer fit in the building where they should. There's a couple of floors there. They've got a big wide open basement that isn't divided up into the types of spaces it needs to be for the elements that are stored down there. And again, I don't want to get too much into how it should be done within this space or what is in that area, but it could be much better secured, much better monitored, much better stored in a modern building. And a little bit of space, just kind of scattered spaces wherever they can find it. So what you find out is that there's just not enough space in the downtown, and if we believe and our professional opinion is pretty solid on this, that you're a department of a size that would be much more efficient if you were operating under one roof. And so I'm not going to go into all the scenarios we looked at, and I will tell you, we looked at many scenarios, and we looked at them in great detail. But we're not actually discussing those sites tonight. But one of them that I do think I'd put up here is the Hall of Justice. And how could you even do that? And here's what you find. This is the footprint of how much space they need if we took City Center and Market Street Garage out of the equation. And there's really no sense in investing dollars in a police project and continue on using City Center building and the Market Street Garage. I mean, to save some money. For long-term value, you're best to pull all these things together. And if you did that in the Hall of Justice, you would be looking at maintaining the approximately 26,000 square feet of space they have under this roof, and you would need a footprint of this size to do that. This is a 2-story building with a basement floor. And the reason that we have a basement floor on this is because there's not much parking down here. And if this county parking goes away, you almost have to replace it. You can't really solve many issues by just placing a building here and displacing this parking. So the way you would accommodate that is probably build a basement level garage so that that parking is not lost, and then have to build 2 floors for the police and courts above it. Now, what that does is it pushes the cost of renovating this into almost the same category. In fact, some of our numbers indicate it would probably be more expensive than building a brand new building. This is the parking that the staff uses now. Even if you did this and you replaced the county's parking here, this is still your parking. I mean, that's it. And for growth in the future, you'd almost have to consider a parking garage somewhere down the road. We looked at different places we could expand this building, and there's no way or not much sense in renovating this building unless you do a major addition somewhere around it. We looked at the possibilities of closing off streets and various things, and those things just really don't make much sense. This one makes a little bit of sense, and if it was a cost saver, it might be worthy of looking at in the downtown area next to the county building. But it doesn't solve all the problems, and it's probably more expensive than building a new building. This is kind of what I want to show you in terms of the current space summary of where you are and where you should be. So we have a existing police square footage of 46,000 square feet. From our program, today's need is 65,000 square feet. Now, I took the courts out of this and looked at purely police functions to get kind of an apples to apples comparison. So if today's need is 65,000 square feet of police, there's another 8,400 square feet of courts. They have 70% of the need that they should be in today. So they've got a 30% deficiency today. For the future, it's only going to get worse. They need 75,000 square feet. The courts is about another 10,000 square feet. And the police deficiency compared to what they have is 62%. They've got almost a 40% deficiency in space going into the future. But here's the thing that really exacerbates the whole problem is that this space, this 46,260, isn't even really all police space. 6,500 square feet is lease space. It takes care of a need, but in some ways you wouldn't say that it's really existing police space because you're leasing it. The other thing is the Market Street garage. It's just wholly inadequate, and there's 5,000 square feet of space there adding to that number to make it all look better, but it's like I said, it's really just a collector, an overflow, because they have no place. And this is common in police departments all over. When they run out of space, communities all over do it. They lease space, they find what space they can, and get by. But at some point, these things usually have to be remedied. So when you really look at serviceable space that the police department has, and I would only call it marginally serviceable, because there's a lot of dysfunctionality and issue in the Hall of Justice and the City Center building, but serviceable space that they could kind of live with is about 34,000 square feet, which is 53% short of today's need, and it's only 46% of the need into the future. So this kind of gives you an idea just on space. This isn't even taking into account all the operational issues related to the way the facilities are laid out today. And space is generally the biggest driver that kind of breaks the back of most police departments and communities to do something to to accommodate those needs. These are the numbers. They are not cheap buildings to build, and these are today's construction numbers. And so what we're doing, but what we did is we put it into components so that you can see, you know, how much each one of these components of this project could or would be. Hard construction costs on a police building today, about $26 million. That's the police building. You have other project costs that we're not aware of if those are built into this number, if it goes into a funding number, or if there's other sources you would use. But AE fees, furnishings, some of the equipment, various things like that, surveys, testing, there's a whole host category of things that go here, runs about 20% onto the project. So the police building today is about, total project cost would be about $31 million. The hard construction cost to build the building itself is about $26 million. And you can see the numbers for each of the components. If you do all of these components, you're looking at today's construction cost of about $35 million, with total project cost of about $42. And escalation goes on at about, we have it at about 5%. It's running right now at about 3 to 4%. A lot of people think it's going to go up higher than that. So we put in a planned number of 5%. These are probably pretty accurate numbers to get to build a building in the next couple of years. And one thing we know, I mean, historically, there's a few periods where the construction cost dollars flatten out. 2008 was one of those. But generally speaking, it just keeps right on going, 3 to 4% every year. There's some periods in there where it goes up 6 to 8% a year. So the buildings are expensive today. They'll only get more expensive into the future. I think it's a matter of how great is the need and what is the benefit. And in our report, we talk a little bit about the benefits at the back end of the study, because we think it's important for a community to know what do we get out of this if we spend these monies. And there are things to be gained in doing these projects. The other thing I'm going to talk about here, and again, there's a lot more information in the study, is what would be your next steps. I mean, generally, you know, obviously you have to digest the report, look at those numbers. I mean, a lot of discussion. It's not immediately on to the next step oftentimes. But the next steps are usually site selection. I mean, we know now how much site area we need. We know how big the building would be on that site. We've looked at the sites, and one of them is in our report that we talked about. It's about 8 acres. And 8 acres will give you enough to build all of the needs in this future program, 20-year program, as well as space to build beyond that. I mean, I think one of the key things about building these buildings is these buildings will last 50 to 100 years, probably much closer to 100 years, and probably without great maintenance, even beyond that. The question is what if the city keeps growing, the department keeps growing? What usually brings a building like this to its end life is they outgrow it. And so we think that one of the best things you can do is not only plan a building for the future, don't just plan it for today, or you'll be chasing your tail for the next 20 years when you could have grown into the building over 20 years and had another maybe 10 years or more to grow out of the building. But beyond that growing out of a building that's planned for 20 years, have a site that gives you some room to expand 30, 40 years from now. And the 8 acres, we looked at it, we actually laid it out. We laid it out with the building on it, will allow you to do that. So site selection, public input, we believe that educating and informing the public is key. There's a lot of things the public doesn't know about what goes on in a police facility, why it takes this much space, and they need to know those things to get behind a project like this. Conceptual design, we've already started it, at least to get to talking points with the department, but you can advance a project, without going too far. It's actually built into our contract to do conceptual design, although it takes authorization from the city to do so. And then educating and informing the public about the project to get the buy-in that's necessary for a project like this. So that's a part. I've laid a lot on you, and I kept it fairly brief compared to what's in there. I don't necessarily expect any questions right now. They will probably come as you get more into this, but any immediate questions that you do have,
I think you'll be surprised.
Oh, okay. That's good.
Councilman Kathy.
If I understood the proposal correctly, and we had a bunch of, I think, what's in here already given to us, but there were the layouts that you were talking about in here.
Mhm.
And it said, on some of those layouts, it said, you know, 3-story plan and then future.
Right.
That 3-story plan included the 85,000 square feet, is that correct?
That is correct.
So that other 30,000 would be for that future expansion you're talking about in, well, this plan was supposed to go through 39, so you're talking about
That's right.
49 or whatever.
Exactly.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding those.
Yeah,
correctly.
and what you are understanding that, and we're kind of showing, here's where we could grow the parking, because you gotta grow the parking in. the
Oh, yeah,
building.
it was all there, I just,
Yeah,
okay.
that's correct.
Bob?
Can I assume you guys were here looking at buildings and talking to folks and got a lot of input? Can I assume we would see a similar situation for the current building that we're using as the main building for the SO? I mean, aren't they in the same boat? So if the PD moved out, that would give them some growing room, is that?
Yeah, definitely, and I will say that I haven't had the detailed discussions with the county, but historically, that is the case. And I mean, I have heard, probably police department staff have informed me that, and again, I wanna be real careful about speaking school, but I would imagine that they would love to have more space for their own use if the police department did move out.
Thank you. Is that?
And you know, it can be nice to have the police in the central, the downtown area, but it's not that common anymore. I mean, you know, that central idea of government consolidated in the city center, that's a good thing, but it's not necessary to good functional operation of a police department. And in a lot of cases, like maybe this one, it can take some of the burden off of the parking demand down there and solve a situation by moving out of that location.
Other questions for Mr. Estes? Mr. Estes, you've obviously been involved in the educating and informing pieces. Can you tell us any of the things you've learned about what's been successful and maybe what hasn't? Because this is going to take a pretty serious sales pitch.
Yeah, first of all, I think there's a couple of things. I think one of the things that we find successful, I'm not sure this is targeting exactly what you're looking at, but we even teach this in our seminars, is that create a group of people that involve some people within the community. So the department and the city leadership doesn't have to be the mouthpiece for the project. Get community leaders, because what most people don't understand is they see patrol cars on the street, they see a uniformed officer, they don't know what goes on in the building, and they think, well, if we didn't have any building at all, wouldn't we still have a police department? Well, you might. It wouldn't be very functional. There's training. That's where the troops muster. I mean, it's where the big picture planning occurs. There's just lots of things that go on inside the police building that people aren't really aware of. It's where the public, where a victim can come safely to talk with an officer. It's where you take somebody that's hostile to kind of secure them, questioning or arrest. There's a host of things that I think like that if you can get a small group of community leaders that are people that are for the benefit and growth of the community, to understand what's going on in this process and the given constraints the department is facing today, and they can help be the messaging avenue for getting the word out there. I think that's good. I think community forums to which we desire to participate in are good. I would tell you there's some things right now that are occurring in departments around that, and I'm kind of waiting to see if they're faddish, I think they're kind of geared to try to engage the public and maybe build public relationship on a day-to-day basis, actually, police department operations, but I think they're also geared to, and that's through improving relationships, but they're probably geared towards making the police facility a little bit more of a social element than just a fortress that the police operate out of. And some of those ideas are things that, we've kind of been testing and we're dabbling in. A basketball court in front of the police building to engage youth in the community. A police officer coming off duty can go out and shoot hoops. A lot of departments have programs that are bicycles, training kids to ride bicycles and stuff. They have a lot of bicycles that come through their place. We were looking at one that's kind of in the early planning. Oftentimes you have water runoff areas around, because of all the, you can't let rainwater run off the property, so we have these retention ponds. We're looking at one right now that's kind of a little bit of a golf green fishing hole with a tee box and a putting green hitting across the pond and doing fishing in the pond. And in essence, we're looking for things that we can do to make it obvious to the public that the police are engaging with the community and the youth. I mean, for instance, and I'm not saying these are all the right ideas for Casper. Some of these are in kind of hard neighborhoods in some southern cities where they wanted to do the basketball courts outside, and where the idea of kind of the golf green, a lot of underprivileged kids never get a chance to pick up a golf club, and they thought, it's a way to have officers get together and kids do some stuff. And we're doing some other things like that. So when you say, do those strike a chord with the public? Yeah, they do. They cost a little bit more money as well, and I'm not saying they're right for every community, but I think we're seeing a lot of communities look for how do we engage the public more. At the same time, you've got to be careful because you've got to create the safe separation of the staff in the building. They're dealing with hostile people as well as victims and witnesses. So, you have to be careful about you don't want to turn a police facility into a care center, but I think there's carefully some things you can do to kind of engage the public in getting and building that relationship with the police department. And when the police department and the fire departments have good relationships with the community, they're generally going to be more supportive of this. I think it's also key that we oftentimes plan these buildings, establish costs, and we never let the public know what's the benefit to doing this. And there are benefits. I mean, key benefits today. It's getting harder and harder to hire police officers.
That was my next question.
And retain them. When the public shows that they support the police officers in not a building that is designed for rest and relaxation and entertainment, but a good, sound police building, one that helps promote training within the department, and one that provides all the right places for conducting interviews. When you allow officers to work in that kind of environment, it has a big difference on morale and retention and hiring. We hear that all the time. And in this day and age, it's getting harder and harder to hire. It's a good thing. I mean, it's the equivalent of if you put them out in patrol cars that the tires are falling off and the lights and sirens don't work. How would that impact officers on the job? The building can be the same way. It's the biggest tool in their toolbox, but it kind of goes unnoticed because that's not where people generally see the presence of the police.
Since you brought that up, that was my question. Has anyone ever conducted studies to show that a new facility improves retention and recruitment rates?
Nobody has ever done a study. We have anecdotal evidence based on just what departments give us in terms of feedback of what they see, and some of it is I hear that they can steal officers from their local county easier, you know, because they've got facilities that are much improved. College football players go to a university sometimes because of the facilities, right? And I think it's the same. I think it's the same way for all of us. So nobody has done a study on that yet. I think you would see that it would make a significant difference though in hiring and retention.
Other questions from Mr. Estes? Thank you for coming all this way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
And we've got some homework to do.
Enjoy.
You won't have a warmer day tomorrow.
That's okay. I was ready for the cool weather. It's been too hot.
There's cool and then there's cold.
Maybe tonight. Be careful what
Any
you wish.
other comments on what's been presented to us? Okay.
The real key question is, what's the Kansas City Star saying about Mahomes playing this weekend?
Okay, so
ran
let's
away
talk
from
about
you.
the fire administration
You missed the
headquarters,
key
station
question.
number 1.
What's the Star saying about Mahomes playing this weekend?
Oh, gosh. You know what?
Hey, Moore played pretty well against the Packers.
He did.
He had us worried.
He did, and that factors in, but.
49ers though.
Mahomes wanted to play last week.
Oh, I know.
So, I think
Yeah,
it's
Packers
like-
play him in December. Should be a great game.
My question would be, who are these guys talking
As
about?
long as Rodgers is healthy.
Don't you jinx us.
Baseball teams?
I grew up there when Len Dawson and Brianna.
No one is there now.
It's gonna be a great game.
Oh, yeah.
That's your shot.
Steve, the question is, when did you ever grow up? I didn't know you did that.
I did.
As the stakes
Just
get
the
higher.
price of my toys went up.
Okay, Mr. City Manager, let's move on to the Fire Administration Headquarters.
I think, Mr. Mayor, we go ahead and defer the floor. I'd be pleased.
Okay.
Go ahead. You can introduce yourself as well.
Absolutely. Mayor and members of the council, my name is Rick Kuehl with Virgin Kuehl and Freshnock Architects. We've been partnering with James and Police Facilities Design Group now for a number of years. With James focusing on the police side and us focusing on the fire. You know, probably about 90 or 95% of my day is spent in fires and design and working on fire projects. So we appreciate and love the opportunity to come to Casper and to kind of assess the facilities here. But before I begin, Dalen Novak is a project architect who's been working on this project kind of side by side with me throughout the process, and then also Grady Davis with Amazon Architects has been our partner throughout the process as well. So we've partnered locally with as well as with James, with Ron and Grady during this process. So I think that one of the things that happens when you get into a book that comes out is that sometimes when you get to the end of that, you kind of raise your head and kind of wondered where you started, right? So what was that objective that we had at the very beginning of this process? And so I think it's kind of important. Unfortunately, Lisa left. Lisa Hubbard was on the interview committee and did a great job, I think, of formatting and establishing the parameters for James and I in terms of looking at facilities for the city of Casper. But if you'll pardon me, one of the things I wanted to just kind of highlight for you here, here are some of the study tasks that should come out of this study and that you should walk away from from our work. But assessing the operational and physical evaluation of the current condition and space needs for both the fire headquarters as well as for station number 1. So that was task 1. Task 2 was to look at the feasibility study to remain at the current locations or to relocate to other locations. So that was task 2. Task 3 was a statement or opinion of probable costs, anticipated budgets for facilities that might come out of the study. That was kind of the third task for us. And then kind of the last thing is looking at anticipated schedule and phasing if phasing was to occur. So our task As it relates to fire, although fire and police have, obviously, they're both public safety agencies, really have very different jobs on a daily basis. And so when you begin to look at the facilities that support their operations, their facilities are very different as well. So what I want to do is I want to walk through station number 1 and kind of give you a profile of what station number 1 is all about, if you haven't had the opportunity to look at station number 1 lately, and kind of look at some of the conditions there that we've assessed in terms of the potential shortfalls that might exist in station number 1, and then talk about some of the recommendations as it relates to station number 1. And then I'm going to look at headquarters and kind of do the same thing in terms of looking at headquarters facilities. Kind of to reflect on James's introductory comments, we went through a very similar process for us in terms of meeting with staff, looking at facilities, taking input, and coming out of that process in terms of what the recommendations might be as it relates to the facilities. But so we're going to talk about conditions overview for station number 1. We're going to look at the administration, or what we call headquarters. And then we're going to look at some recommendations. But one of the things I want to highlight for you is that there are kind of 3 critical areas that we looked at as it relates to kind of facility conditions and what benchmarks might exist for those facilities. Health, safety, and wellness as it relates to facilities, but also as it relates to the facility as they are operated by the fire department is a key consideration. Code non-compliance as well. The station number 1, we're going to look at this in a second here, has been in operation for some time. And as with most facilities that are operated for 30 or 40 years or more, obviously the code compliance requirements change over time, and so you would expect the facilities really aren't maybe necessarily code compliant today because they were built to the codes at the time when they were constructed. And kind of the last thing, which is a very difficult thing to really discern, is operational deficiencies. And it's one thing when you walk into a building, you can kind of see the conditions of the ceilings, the walls, and the floors, and that sort of thing, or look at the mechanical systems and understand that. But it's really very hard to assess kind of the operational efficiency of a building as it relates to the daily functions of the fire department in terms of the things that they do. And we're going to talk a little bit about how the current facilities maybe don't support the operational efficiencies as well as they should. And then kind of the last item here is kind of looking at the statement of probable costs. So station number 1 was a facility that was built in 1976. It has between 11 and 12,000 square feet and is primarily made up of about 50% of that is going to be apparatus bay, a third of that's going to be kind of living quarters, and a third of that's going to be bunk room space. So if you look at the 11 or 12,000 square feet, it's pretty easy to see that about half of that is consumed by apparatus, as you might expect. There's a lot of big pieces of equipment that go in the apparatus bay. Some of the distinguishing characteristics for us is it's a precast concrete building. It has a flat roof. It has some ornamentation. You'll see some of that in the background here in terms of stone and pre-finished metal panel. It is a site that has shared parking with the police department. So a portion of the north side of the site is occupied by the police department for vehicles to be parked over there as well as for the fire. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the significance of that in terms of the impact of the operations here in a little bit. Also, another key distinction in terms of the characteristic of the building is it has what we call dormitory style bunk rooms. So if you've not been to the fire station, the bunk room or bunk room wing of that station is a large open area that has partial height partitions, but it's really one large area for dormitory style sleeping in that area. So some of the primary deficiencies that we see are a lack of health and wellness protocols for personnel. One of the significant things that exists in the fire industry these days is the high incidence of cancer among firefighters. In fact, we were just at a fire chiefs conference in Kansas, and the fire chief there had gone back and looked at the records of the personnel that had been in that department and the reason for their death over time. And he was actually able to discern that 70% of the retired firefighters that had served in that department had died from cancer. Now, is that a coincidence? Is that a statistic that can really bear up under scrutiny, that looks at kind of is it what the cause of that might be? You know, those are some subjective considerations, but I will tell you that in the fire industry, if you pick up fire magazines, say fire engineering, firehouse design, or whatever it might be, you'll see articles in most every magazine relate to the high incidence of cancer among firefighters. So when I talk about the lack of health and wellness protocols for personnel when it relates to decontamination processes, that really relates directly to the health of the firefighters in terms of what they do on a daily basis and how they decontaminate themselves from an event they might come back from, and whether that's a grass fire, whether that's a structure fire, whether that's a wreck, or whatever it might be. So, lack of appropriate environmental design. So, this kind of goes hand in hand with the notion of decon protocols. So, one of the things that would exist in most fire stations these days that we're designing is that we're creating environments that have positive air pressure that exists in the living quarters and negative air pressure that exists in the apparatus space. So when a firefighter opens a door from the living quarters to access the apparatus bay, the air flows from the living quarters into the apparatus bay and not the other way. So we look at the apparatus bay as a red zone. And so one of the things we'll talk a little bit about here in a bit is the idea of red, yellow, and green zones as it relates to the facility function and the operations, and particularly the protocols of how you create what we could consider a healthy environment in a fire station. Item number 3, sufficient quality of living space for personnel. A little bit along the lines of what James is talking about, and this is something that is we're looking at very intently these days, is that when a firefighter comes back from an event, one of the questions would be as well, the first step is to decon in terms of protocol, and you go through that protocol and that transitioning from a contaminated to a non-contaminated state. And kind of the next thing would be is, well, while you can clean the outside of your body, the other thing that happens is, well, what happens with your body mentally? And there are some studies that are going on these days that says that kind of one of the leading causes of fatigue among firefighters is the lack of rest and the ability to get good rest. And so creating environments that create that space for them that support the idea of healthy rest. Because one of the things that we're seeing in the fire industry is that there are crews that are remaining on duty for longer periods of time. You used to be 24 on, and so on and so forth, and 48 and 96. So we're seeing departments that are having personnel that are on duty for a lot longer periods of time. So one of the things that we're looking at from a facility standpoint is how do we design a facility that creates an environment to support that healthy living. Item number 4, does the facility support a diverse workforce? So in a dormitory style setting, obviously that's going to be hard to achieve because there are more and more women that are joining the fire department. Items 5, 6, 7, and 8 are really kind of secondary elements, but they all add to kind of some deficiencies that exist with station number 1. Doing a little bit deeper dive, and we talked a little bit earlier about this, the decontamination protocol. So in order to address that issue with station number 1, our recommendation would be is that you provide additional space for decon protocols And that would be adding both rooms and equipment to station number 1 in order to achieve that. One of the things that you'll see in the study is there are some conceptual designs that are in there, but in particular you'll see a plan enlargement that looks at the decon protocol process and how you transition from a red to a yellow to a green zone, and what that means in terms of how the space should be set up, as well as what the equipment should be within those spaces. Fire gear storage and the placement of fire gear and where that should be. Fire gear right now is currently stored in the apparatus bay. One of the things that we've known for a long time is that the exhaust particulate off from a piece of apparatus breaks down the fire retardancy of gear. So the gear that's stored in the apparatus bay is automatically exposed to the contaminants from the apparatus that's in the apparatus bay. Now, at station number 1, there is direct capture systems that do get hooked up to exhaust, but you know, not all exhaust is going to be captured by that system. There's going to be periods of time where that exhaust is exposed or exhausted into the apparatus bay. We also know that sunlight is very much a contaminant or a breakdown in terms of performance in terms of gear over time. Both the diesel exhaust and sunlight break down the fire retardancy of gear. But that exists in terms of station number 1. SCBA is the self-contained breathing apparatus acronym, and that's the air that fireman wears as an air pack on their back. The SCBA equipment is located inside the apparatus bay. So our recommendation would be is that we create a space for that equipment outside of the apparatus bay, so you remove it from a potential exposure and contamination that might exist. So obviously that would not be a good situation if I'm a firefighter at a fire event and my air contains anything that might come back from the apparatus bay. Access control and video surveillance. One of the things that's pretty important, unfortunate in terms of our circumstances these days, is that there's a greater and greater need for us to be able to protect the residents of public safety facilities, and being able to do access control and video surveillance that provides for that protection is a critical thing, we think, in terms of health, safety, and wellness as it relates to fire station design. Code deficiencies, not a huge number of things, but one of the things that's required these days is that there be a fire separation between the bunk room space and the rest of the fire station. Bunk room space is really a R2 occupancy and needs to be separated from the rest of the building with a 1-hour fire separation, and that does not exist as it relates to the station as it does today. And ADA compliance, I think you can walk into any building almost anywhere and find non-ADA compliance as it relates to a building. Operational efficiencies, diverse workforce accommodation. So what we're suggesting is that, and what we're doing at almost every station that we're working on these days, is there's one bunk room and there's one firefighter, and they all have their own space. So every firefighter has their own sleeping accommodation, which begins to address the comment that I made earlier in terms of some sleep deprivation and the provision in terms of providing quality sleep as it relates to the health firefighter environment. One of the things that we think is probably going to be generally probably impossible to solve, but there are requirements in terms of, or I wouldn't say requirements, I would say they're benchmarks in terms of turnaround time. So turnaround time is how much time does it take you to get from your bunk to the apparatus and being able to turn out of the station, and that is a response. It directly correlates to the response time in terms of the event. So the further the bunk is from the apparatus, the longer the turnout time, the slower the efficiency in terms of response to a fire. I would tell you that the furthest distance, I think, from the last bunk to the piece of apparatus, I think we measured at between 150 and 160 feet. Most of the time, we're trying to get to 75. So we're looking at 75 as a reference point and what we would like to see in terms of distance from a bunk room to a piece of apparatus for turnout efficiency. Training space is really pretty much non-existent in station number 1. There is some space that they can train in terms of what we would call classroom training, but generally it is very limited in terms of what can happen as a firefighter to train on a regular basis. Item D down here that's under operational efficiencies in terms of the apron. In order for the fire department to complete engine checks, which are done on a daily basis, and normally start at the start of each shift, is that engines are pulled out of the apron. They run through all the lights and sirens and all the equipment on fire engine and make sure that it's ready for service for that day. Well, in order to do that at station number 1, you actually have to pull off the property line. You're approaching the street in terms of being able to pull a piece of apparatus out of station number 1 to complete an engine check, which does a couple of things. Obviously, it puts some firefighters at risk if they're doing engine checks and they're standing in the street or near the street. The other thing is it puts public at risk as well. So now I've got an engine, which is a pretty big piece of apparatus, providing some obstruction in terms of use of the street. So, for the existing administration, which is the city center building, and James talked a little bit about that earlier, is that this is the building that was constructed in 1956. It is a co-location, so fire and police occupy city center. Fire and police both use the basement level space in terms of the large conference room space down there and the meeting space on the basement level. Police is on the first floor, fire is on the second floor, so there's some intermixing there, but it's about 7,000 square feet that the fire department uses at, and this 3,400 square feet that's up here is part of the space that's shared with the fire department. So some of the distinguishing characteristics about City Center is that it is a co-location with the police department. There are joint operations, as I said, basement level space is used for training by both police and fire. It's a very, what I call a compact 3-story building, and it has some fairly narrow corridors on all the floors. Some of the operational efficiencies or deficiencies is that I think that there are some challenges in terms of co-location with police and fire operations. In order to access the fire department or fire administration, you actually have to go through the police floor to get to the second floor to access fire administration. I think that there's really a large inefficient or deficiency as it relates to meeting space, particularly as it relates to fire marshal. So kind of the community risk assessment space and the personnel that are located at the second floor. If you were to go tour that, you'll see that there's very cramped quarters up there in terms of accommodating all of the personnel, as well as the ability to meet the public and conduct plan reviews and meeting reviews with folks who are applying for building permits or trying to build a building. The administration space on the third floor, or the second floor also, third level, second floor, is also very tight quarters. If you go up there, you'll see that while we have chiefs and deputies chiefs space and a reception room, there really isn't a lot of space on that second floor to accommodate multiple meetings that might occur. There's one conference room that exists on the second floor. And then kind of the rest of the items are pretty self-explanatory, and I won't go through those in any detail. But some of the deficiencies that we see at the fire administration is that there's what we call an egress design deficiency that exists with the stairway that's at the second floor. So once you come in the front door, you really have access to the entire building. So it's basically an uncontrolled building from an access standpoint. One of the things that you will see, and this actually applies to station number 1, that would be a design requirement today, is that fire facilities, whether it's a station or whether it's fire administration, is classified as what's considered an essential facility. An essential facility, and the police department falls under that, and James spoke a little bit about that earlier, is that as an essential facility, you have certain design requirements that relate to your facility that do not relate to any other facility that might exist other than hospitals or similar kinds of facilities that would be required as essential facilities. But there's a lack of an essential facility design associated with the current fire administration building. There is, for operational efficiencies, I think that we're looking at items A and B and C. I think there's probably really an inability to provide the spaces that are needed based on the space programming that was contained in this document. If you look at the space needs requirements to meet the requirements for space that's needed for both meetings, office space, and public interface as it relates to providing services from the fire department for the city of Casper. You know, kind of some of the assessment in looking at kind of what the options might be for resolving the design issues or the space issues associated with both headquarters and with station number 1. You know, relocating fire administration, we think would be a recommendation of ours, and they're currently programmed at 7,000 square feet. Based on the space needs requirements, we're suggesting that there should be 16,000 square feet to accommodate all of the space functions that are required for the current department, as well as along with James, providing some additional expansion capacity for the fire department. Understanding that the building that you build today, just like James was saying, is not the one that you're going to be occupying in 20 years or 40 years. 16,000 square feet is what we're suggesting as a space requirement for fire administration. For station number 1, the relocation of station number 1, as you saw, is about 11,000 or 12,000 square feet. Based on the space program requirements and discussions with the fire department, we believe that that space requirement is now somewhere around 24,000 square feet. So station number 1 provides for, I believe, 10 bunk spaces or 12 bunk spaces. And the program suggests that we should be at 16 bunk spaces to provide for some additional capacity within the station for the future. So if you're going to look at co-location of station number 1 and administration, there would be some space efficiencies associated with that. Primarily as it relates to apparatus space, because the suggestion was that the training room get created at the co-location and it become a space requirement for this fire headquarters, and that if the training program or the training space was located at fire headquarters, a lot of times what happens with fire personnel that are on duty is that they drive their apparatus to the training site. And so if we have personnel coming from outlying stations to station number 1, particularly in the winter time, if they're coming, they need a space inside to park their apparatus. So some of the apparatus could be parked as at station number 1 for training at a co-located station. If they're separate facilities, then our recommendation would be to look at providing apparatus space that's dedicated solely for fire crews that are at the headquarters doing training at that particular day. So this suggests that 38,000 square feet might be a co-located design requirement for space needs, and if you were to make them separate facilities, a little over 40,000 square feet would be the space requirements for separate facilities. So statement of probable cost, I didn't put the dollar value up here, and I was James and I actually didn't talk about this, but the $425 square foot value that James used for the police is actually the value that we use for the low value for the fire. And that we see a 10% margin between the low value and the high value. So $425 a square foot is what we're suggesting for the low value. $467.50 is what we're suggesting the high value would be for fire. So based on the 16,000 square feet and the 24,000 square feet, these are the costs that we would arrive at. We're including in here a contingency value of 20%. Understanding that these costs at $425 a square foot includes both the building cost as well as the site development cost for what I consider normal site development. So if we get into site development that has some unusual conditions where the soil is extremely poor, there's contaminants, we're building streets, whatever it might be, then there would need to be some additional consideration for that. James talked about the 1.2 to 20% as a soft cost adder. Those are the soft costs that are broken out down here, and those are some of the things that go into the soft cost requirements. So if it's a geotechnical investigation or testing inspections during the construction, or fixtures, furniture, and equipment that gets moved into the station, that sort of thing. So that would be the soft costs that would be associated. It's a little bit less than 20%, but these are numbers that we would see for a station and headquarters of this size. This also assumes that this would be construction that would be started in 2020. And just as James suggested earlier, we are seeing inflation in the market. So we're seeing something in the 4 to 6% range. So if this facility is delayed beyond 2020, then I think that would be something we want to take into consideration in terms of the cost of the project. These are expensive buildings, as James said. One of the things to keep in mind is that these are 40, 50, and 60-year buildings. So you do construct them and design them with materials that have that kind of durability. Outside of facilities like hospitals, these are occupied 24/7, 365, so they get a lot of use. So it's materials that would kind of support that kind of use at that kind of price point.
Questions for Mr. Kuehl? Kuehl, did I pronounce it?
Fuel, yes, absolutely, thank you. Rick.
Ken?
Just a couple, well, possibly a couple. Were you a part of the other fire stations that were built?
No.
Okay. If I may ask, or maybe you can answer. The code deficiencies, most of the code deficiencies that he talked about, were they addressed with the other fire stations that were built?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman, I would say they were. The Station 5, for example, was completed this past summer, and it's consistent with the current building code and whatnot. What it lacks, however, that I was kind of intrigued by was the decontamination facilities that was discussed earlier, and it certainly adds cost to a project of this nature, but I think as was identified, probably would be a feature on any fire station we would want to build from now on. So.
Just a reminder, Kurt, each of our fire stations have sort of a specific mission that they take on as a specialty area. I think PV is decontamination, Right, and then one of our stations has wildland fire specialty, am I correct on that? What is fire station number 1?
That's a good question. I'd be happy to defer to either of the chiefs here tonight to, if you could review what those specialties are with regard to the stations that exist and what the primary difference would be to Station 1 as far as that goes, that'd be great.
Sure, Mayor, members of council, you're correct. They typically have specialties based on their geographic area. Like Station 2 has been our wildland station, given its proximity to Casper Mountain. You're correct. Station number 6 has been our hazardous materials station, given it's typically upwind of our predominant winds for Casper coming out of the southwest. Station 5 in the past has been more of our communication station, and that long time ago, and Chief Harshman can help me fill in the gaps, it was outfitted where we could park the mobile command vehicle out there, plug into it. If dispatch were to go down, we could then put the mobile command vehicle at Station 5 and dispatch out of it. Now we have a backup dispatch center at Station 3, which really doesn't have a specialty per se, other than it's in the heart of the city and just runs a lot of medical calls and a lot of calls, period. Station 1 is kind of our headquarters station. It has the most staff on it. It also has our 2 specialty apparatus, the ladder truck and the rescue truck. All those stations just have an engine. Station 1 also has an engine as well, but it also has our aerial ladder truck and our rescue truck. So you could call it a special operations, if you will. The aerial ladder's obviously downtown because that's where our multi-story buildings are. And then the rescue truck, given its, it doesn't have a jurisdiction, but its proximity to the river, the interstate, it has the type of equipment that allows us to respond to that. Yeah, so.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Bob.
Well, this may be a little more from our staff too, but we talked earlier with the PD, we talked about ability to hire folks. And, you know, I look at our bunk situation with the more lady firefighters coming on, of course, more ladies with a PD, but doesn't that seem like something that would be helpful when we're trying to hire firefighters? I mean, is there, we have the same kind of issues trying to hire people that are qualified?
Absolutely, and just to kind of piggyback on what James was saying earlier, it is getting more difficult to recruit personnel, whether for police or for fire. And so, you know, trying to provide facilities that would speak to them as a facility they would like to work at. And we've actually seen that happen even with some departments that we've completed facilities for, is that they do become a marketing tool in some respects, but they also, it becomes sometimes a bit of a challenge for operations because there are personnel that actually want to work at that station that may be at another station because of what that station actually offers from a facility standpoint. But absolutely, we've seen that happen with the facilities that we've done.
Carter had a question. Do you have follow-up?
Just a quick follow-up. Do we have a similar situation with having some better dedicated training?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I see us having the possibility of contract training for other fire departments.
Mm-hmm. Well, the training space that we're talking about is claim training, so as opposed to tactical training. So a tactical training would be a facility that might provide for live fire burn and that sort of thing. So, or high angle rescue or confined space or whatever it might be. But this is classroom training, which would be a large classroom space that could accommodate, do you remember how many people?
50 or 60, I think.
Yeah,
It's pretty
60,
high.
yeah. I'd say a little bit more, but it's 50 or 60 folks that could be in that room at one time. And a little bit of what I was talking about earlier is that, you know, crews will come to that location that are on duty. They'll bring their apparatus with them, obviously, because they're on duty, but they need a place to park it in the wintertime. So they've got water in those trucks. They can't leave them outside. So that's why the apparatus bay becomes important, is for them to have a place to park their vehicles while they're doing training.
The space can also be used for the community because of the access control. You can lock off just the lobby and the restrooms and that community training room so that people outside of fire or police or anybody could use that space as well. So also we looked at it as being a storm shelter type space as well.
So for the 2018 International Building Code, there are requirements in there for there to be provisions for shelter unless you've externed those from the code. And the training room space would be a space that we've designed actually in some respects to meet those requirements.
I think Carter had a question.
One of the questions that I would like some clarification on, and it might harken back to Chief Griswold's response a little earlier about the differences between the various stations and whatnot. Why is it that we're needing so much more space at Station 1 as a station if you were to, you know, disassociate an admin from that facility compared to the other stations where we have 6 bunks or whatever at stake?
Sure. That one's for me? Yeah, so Mayor, Member of Council, not unlike our other stations we've built that are currently staffed with 3 firefighters, we built them for the future. We really believe that these stations are pieces of infrastructure that have city employees in them 24/7. So our Station 5 just opened up in February, has 3 members assigned to it. There's actually 6 of these individual bunk rooms in that station. Speaking for myself, the fire service, the community dictates really what they expect from their fire department. And we don't know what services in the future they're gonna ask of us. So specific to Station 1, right now, it's larger. It houses, on a day-to-day basis, more firefighters, a minimum of 6, a maximum of 10 right now, to where all the other stations only have 3. So as we build Station 1 or a replacement Station 1, we also want to build it for the future. So we built maximum at 10 right now to 16 right now, given we don't know the future demands the community would ask of our fire department. And that could look any number of things, a second engine that runs out of air based on call volumes. I don't know. But to include additional base space for the training room component and stuff like that, and just extra auxiliary components. So where the square footage is large for a station like this, it is our current Station 1 is our largest station. This one's going to be our largest station, has more fire apparatus, has our largest the aerial truck, that type of stuff, and then building it again for the future, it's then going to be compounded as well. That answer your question?
Yes. If I could piggyback on that, so one of the things that's happening in the fire industry is that, you know, we are trying to create spaces that disconnect from the apparatus bay and create compartments so that we're not experiencing the exposure of the apparatus bay that I talked about earlier. So we're building separate rooms for gear, and we're building separate rooms for gear because many departments are now trying to have at least 2 sets of gear. So they've got a clean set of gear and they've got a potential city dirty set of gear. So they're multiplying the sets of gear that we have. And then also fitness is a key thing for firefighters. And one of the things that we're seeing these days in terms of fire departments is the expansion of the fitness areas. CrossFit is a huge trend right now in fire departments in terms of fitness. And CrossFit does take up a fair amount of space, as well as even just the normal equipment that you have, fitness equipment in a station. So where you might have had a station that had 300 or 400 square feet for fitness, you're seeing now 800, 900 square feet for fitness. So it's getting obviously much larger in terms of those support spaces.
Mr. Kuhl, did you consider the pros and cons of co-locating these 2 facilities versus having them be separate facilities? Would that change costs in any way? Do you recommend them being separate or combined?
I think the key differentiator it would be if they're located at separate locations, and they can be. If they're located at separate locations, we would need to look at apparatus bay function support for the headquarters for the training room, which would add square footage to the program to accommodate that.
So this proposal is as a combined facility?
It could be, we're suggesting that it could be either combined or separate, but generally, you're correct. We're looking at a co-location with this cost estimate.
Steve, go ahead.
You did say that you were using $425 a square foot?
For the low number.
Yes. What I was getting at is, based on the numbers you showed earlier and what was in here, you're looking at saving roughly 2,100 square feet by combining, which is right at $900,000. And that's hard cost. So you're looking at over $1 million by combining them as far as dollars and cents are concerned.
Plus 2 different sites.
Yeah, plus site acquisition, but that's, yeah.
Ken?
I noticed that with all of them, they're all ground floor spread out. Is it unethical now to have double floors?
Where we've seen stacking of space for fire in particular has probably been in the bunk room wing. And we've done that primarily to try to reduce distance between the bunk and the apparatus. So it's not impossible to do that. We have done that. We're doing it right now on a station in Nebraska where they have bunk rooms on the second floor. I think operationally, we would want to have a discussion with the fire department. Just with the old slide poles, they present some risk for firefighters in the middle of the night when you're getting up. And, you know, particularly if you've already been at an event, you've come back, you're sleeping, now you're called at again, right? So you're getting weary. And if you've been on multiple day shifts and you've been particularly busy, compounds it as well. So it's not impossible. We are doing that at some locations.
I think the majority of our stations are single floor. You don't have to deal with stairs and all that other stuff, but it is truly up to the department what they want.
But the biggest challenge is that, particularly with 16 bunks, is how do you get all those folks that close together?
I was just thinking even administration, just,
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Oh, that
an
would be-
administration
yeah.
of,
Yeah,
and then
absolutely.
bonds, but I was just wondering.
So stacking administration above the station, is that what you're saying? We have not looked at that. Could look at it.
Zip lines.
Mike?
Zip lines. Did you give any
about
consideration
slides.
to, in essence, building a new Station 1 for the attack people and, for instance, repurposing old Station 1, or as I would call it, new old Station 1 for the administration?
We did look at the possibility of locating administration where Station 1 is. We would have to add on to that station to get it to accommodate the functions of the administration, but we did look at that, yes.
What, do you have any guess what that cost?
You know,
Dollars?
I apologize,
Worked out.
we did not assess the renovation and expansion cost for Station 1. We could probably do that.
Again, the problem with persuading the public that this is a necessary expenditure.
Yeah.
We've been told in the past that there are rating systems that communities, that basically fire departments are rated in terms of using response times and other measures that insurance companies essentially use to set their rates.
Right.
Is the age of facilities or the quality of facilities part of that calculus in any way?
So I think you're referring to ISO rating?
I think so, yes.
And Chief, you want to talk about that as it relates to?
Yeah, Mayor, members of council, to my knowledge, to your point on response times, yes, that's definitely a component of it. Age of facilities, I don't remember that from our last assessment. Do you, Chief? No. I don't remember that being a part of that calculation. A lot of it's on the water department, and response times, our training and data tracking measures and stuff like that. But as far as age of facilities, I don't remember that being a component.
Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Kuehl? Thank you as well for coming all this way and all the work you've done. And we'll see where this leads us.
I want to add my thanks and appreciation to you as well. We greatly appreciate the opportunity to come to Casper and to work with the fire department, and it's been a great experience for us. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, anything else for the good of the order this evening? I think given the situation, we can kind of skip the go-around unless someone has something urgent they need to tell us. Okay, we don't need to do a legislative review. I wish you all the best next Tuesday, and I'll be participating by phone.
Have fun.
You guys enjoy your tropical weather.
I will.
You'll be here in the negative
All right,
30.